Hi, I'm Aura and I'm the host of Collective Mind, and sorry about the box in the background, but I just did an unboxing and I don't think I can lift it to move it out of the way right now. But if you want to see that unboxing, it should be up soon, if not already publicly on our Patreon. But anyway, that's not what this video is about. This video is about consent with therapy, and especially with things like exposure therapy and trauma processing, and why those things should not be done by people who are not trained in them, essentially. So generally speaking, exposure therapy tends to be used for dealing with like phobias, and it is like exposing yourself to the phobia. Basically, it's being around the thing that so terrifies you to get used to it and become like kind of desensitized to it and prove to yourself that it's not as scary or dangerous as it feels like it is. And trauma processing is processing trauma. It's like looking at the trauma that happened and the way it's still impacting your life and working through that. And both of these types of therapy require specialized training. Even professionals who do them are supposed to have specialized training in that exact type of therapy before they are doing it with clients. So it's certainly not something that's supposed to be done by people who aren't even trained professionals, but I'm going to get more into that in a minute. The reason it's so important to have the training and to understand how these types of therapy are supposed to work is because if they are done incorrectly, they can just be triggering or re-traumatizing or reinforce the fear itself and do a lot of harm. So there are specific ways that it's supposed to be done to avoid that, and there is a lot of work that goes into it before you even start the main things that you'll think of with exposure therapy and trauma processing. Like exposure therapy and trauma processing, you are not supposed to be doing the big scary thing immediately. Whatever the phobia is, whatever the trauma is, you're not supposed to be dealing with that immediately in your first session. That's just not how it works. And that would be just breaking trust and just scaring the client without helping them. It's very, very important for both of these processes that the client feels safe and in control the whole time. That's why the consent piece is so essential. The whole point of it is to get through the hard thing while feeling safe and in control. So there's a lot of prep work that goes into getting you ready for that before you do it. You slowly work up to it. You build a lot of coping skills and trust with the therapist or whoever the professional is that you're working with before you actually do it. If this is trauma processing like we have done, it was a lot of talking about less intense, like day-to-day things first. Just talking about like work stress when we were still working, and like any relationship stress that was happening, and like almost more of the normal therapy type stuff. Building trust with our therapist first before we got anywhere near talking about any trauma. But it's also about building those coping skills so that you and the professional are both confident that you have things that you can do to help with how hard exposure therapy and or trauma processing is, because they are both intense. Even if done correctly, they can be pretty stressful and intense, but they are not supposed to cause harm. And the way that you do that is having those coping skills that you're doing continuously, and then stopping if it gets too big, if it's too much, if you're getting overwhelmed, and doing just those coping skills and like in our case, we've had times where we were talking through something trauma related, and then we had to stop and we talked about books and movies with our therapist for the rest of the session, trying to work on like regulating ourselves again and calming down, but also as a way of having that control and feeling safe of we are not going to be forced to keep talking about it and re-experiencing that trauma at any point that it gets to be too much. Otherwise, it's just having flashbacks in front of the therapist, and that doesn't make any progress. That doesn't help. And it can break a lot of trust, because if our therapist were just regularly triggering our flashbacks and not actually doing anything to help, that would come off as an attack to us. So that would be in the same way as if like anyone else in our real life or anyone online even knew some of our negative triggers and were intentionally triggering us. That's not what trauma processing is supposed to be. So this is also why it's neither of these things are really supposed to be done by like friends and family, especially by force. Even if they mean well, they could think that they like know what exposure therapy is, know what trauma processing is, and you're supposed to talk about it, and if you don't talk about it, it's just going to get worse, or you're supposed to face whatever the fear is, because otherwise it's going to get worse. But if you just throw them in the deep end like that to like prove to them it's not scary, or try to force them to process it when they're not ready, or whatever equivalent thing it is, again, there's the lost trust. It can make that person who did that feel unsafe, because they just put you through that. They just made you face something that you're certain is unsafe. How do I explain that? Even if something is inherently safe, which not all phobias are of things that are totally safe. There are phobias of things that can actually do harm. But even, let's say it's a phobia of something that is totally and completely safe, could not, like under normal circumstances, harm you in any way. The fact that it's a phobia means that you on some level cannot believe that yet. You haven't done like all of the therapy work and everything you would need to get desensitized to it enough to feel on any level like it might be as safe as it actually is. So if someone forces you to be in contact with that thing that you're certain is very dangerous, if not deadly, like your brain and like body chemicals and everything are reacting pretty much exactly the same as if that person had just like attacked you or put you in a really, really dangerous situation on purpose, knowingly, just saying it was for your own good or whatever. And I wouldn't be able to continue to trust someone who did that to me. And generally speaking, in a lot of situations, it wouldn't be like safe or smart to continue to trust people who attack you and put you in danger. So that can really backfire in that way, but also because if you haven't done the work and learned the coping skills and worked up to it slowly like you're supposed to with exposure therapy, it's just essentially triggering, and having another negative experience with whatever the phobia is reinforces the phobia instead of desensitizing it. So it's like, I thought this thing was super scary, and then I had to face it, and I was terrified, and it was a horrible, really, really bad experience, and it like ruined my mental health for several days, if not longer, etc., etc. And now I have like trauma backing up my phobia. And that doesn't help, it just causes harm. And it actually can't help if you don't do those first steps first, if you don't do it the way it's supposed to work. Like, the parts of your brain that need to be able to be active to do like the processing and desensitizing part can't even be active if you just like face the hardest part of it immediately, because you're in like a triggered trauma mode, and your brain isn't supposed to be able to process things in that way when you're in that, like when you're having trauma responses like that. Basically, when you're in a crisis mode, it's like a totally different wiring of your brain, basically. And you can't like think clearly and reassure yourself and all of those things in the same way. Not even like I'm not saying it's hard, I'm saying you can't. Like, your brain will not do it until you do all of the building up, all of the work leading up to it. And like I said, like, both of these types of therapy are known to be difficult. They're stressful, they're intense, but they're not supposed to cause harm. They are not supposed to do further harm. They're not supposed to make you terrified of the person who's helping you with it. They are not supposed to make your symptoms worse long term. They might, like, it's pretty common to have more flashbacks about the stuff you're processing in therapy while you're processing it and that type of thing, but you should have the coping skills to work through that before you get to that point. So you have a lot of like grounding tools and calming tools and whatever else that you need to be able to deal with the extra flashbacks that you're going to have, that type of thing. So it shouldn't be re-traumatizing. It shouldn't be just triggering. And you should have like absolute say of, I am not talking about this right now, or I'm not talking about this anymore right now, or don't ask me about this ever again unless I bring it up. We've said that to our therapist before. Don't bring this up again unless we do. And we can say we just need to stop for the rest of today. We need to have like lighthearted conversation for the rest of this session. And our therapist will also bring that up and will say, like, do you want a break from this? And remind us that we are allowed to stop talking about it when he can see that we're not doing as well anymore. If we're doing a lot of dissociating, if we look really triggered or seem like we're having flashbacks, if we're getting switchy, any of that stuff, he'll start checking in more often and making sure that we're still okay to be working on stuff and remind us of our coping skills and things like that. And if we one day told him we're not doing any trauma work for the next 6 months, he would say okay. For whatever reason. Like, we wouldn't even have to give him a reason, but we could go in there and say, hey, we're gonna have an already stressful 6 months and we can't handle doing trauma work on top of it, or we have too many like trauma anniversaries coming up over the next however long and we can't handle doing trauma work on top of it, or something in our last session broke some trust and we need to build that trust back up, even if he didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but we just got triggered in such a way that we don't have that level of trust with him right now and we need to build it back up. Whatever the reason is, we can stop any part of it at any point for as long as we need to, period. And that's how that has to work for it to be safe enough to be able to do that kind of processing. But forcing someone to just do those things because that's the treatment for the problem is unhelpful and can cause a lot of harm, like I said, but it's because that's like the fourth step or something of those treatments. You don't jump right into the deep end. And jumping right into the deep end cannot work unless you've done, like, I guess technically if you've done a lot of that work yourself and then you go into a first session with a therapist or whatever, that therapist should still, if they know what they're doing, go over a lot of that with you, making sure that you have enough skills, like coping skills and everything that you need for it, and making sure they know what some of those are and if there are any that they should not bring up to you and stuff like that, because some people, including us, have certain common coping skills that are triggering. So that can complicate things, but like in a lot of cases it's very helpful for the therapist to know what at least some of the coping skills are, to be able to remind you of them if you need them during a session, or to even be able to do them with you. Like if it's a grounding exercise of like thinking about certain things or finding certain things in the room or whatever, they can walk you through it and help keep you grounded enough to do the grounding exercise, you know? So this video is essentially rooted in two major pet peeves that we have that are bigger than pet peeves because they do real harm. But essentially there's like the professional side and the friends and family side of professionals who don't actually know how trauma processing works. I've seen it the most in trauma processing because that is what we have a closer connection to. That's what we have more experience with ourselves, and know a lot of people who have also experienced it and see people talk about it online and stuff like that. But I'm sure it happens with exposure therapy. Well, maybe I'm not as sure that it happens with exposure therapy too, but it definitely happens with trauma processing, where therapists or other mental health professionals, or maybe even just doctors who aren't trained in mental health, I hope not, but maybe, haven't actually looked into how trauma processing is supposed to work. And instead, they just start, like even an intake session with, tell me all of your trauma. And that is not at all how that is supposed to work. Not even close. And it's a type of ignorance that does a lot of harm, and so it frustrates me a lot. It frustrates us a lot. And the other thing that we see, I mentioned earlier, of friends and family and just people in your life who want to help and have heard of the idea of trauma processing or exposure therapy or whatever, and know that the core idea of it is talk about it or be around the thing that scares you or whatever to get over it. And that's all they know about it. And it's, again, a harmful type of ignorance where they take on a role that they shouldn't take on with that person that they are not trained to do. And they think that they're helping and they're not. And it can be really bad. It can be really bad. And it can make it harder for whoever ends up doing like the real version of exposure therapy or trauma processing later. It gives them more work to do because there's more to unpack. But in the meantime, it is also making day-to-day life worse for whoever they're trying to help, and potentially ruining that relationship they have with that person for a while, if not forever. And there can be aspects of it that you don't understand, that like you could even put someone in actual danger. Like something that I've thought of before is if someone thought they were going to fix the relationship between someone and their abuser or something by inviting them both to the same place and telling them to work it out or whatever. Like, there are just... One thing I will say that you can do that can help in these types of situations is to encourage people to work on these things at their own pace. So it, again, really, really can't be forced. But if, like, let's say it was agoraphobia, so like staying inside all the time and being scared of going outside. If you talk to them and you try to find like baby step things that feel doable to them, that they agree to, and find things that they can do that will help it feel safer or whatever. Maybe they have headphones on the whole time and they're listening to music or watching a movie or something, and they're gonna walk to the car and then sit in the car without the car going anywhere for 5 minutes and then go back inside. Like, there can be little things that you agree to that can actually help. Or like saying, in the case of trauma, saying that you're like willing to listen if they want to talk about anything. That can help. But consent is an essential piece of it. Even more than a lot of other things. Consent is essential to a lot of things, but these types of processes really can't be done without it. So, and it's again not a mindset thing. It's an actual, like, which areas of your brain are online thing. It's the areas of your brain that you need to do these processes shut down when you're in too much of a trauma crisis mode, and you cannot use them until you feel safe enough again that you're not fully in that mode anymore. So it's something we're pretty passionate about, that we see problems with too often, and it's one of those things of a lot of professionals need to not pretend that they are able to treat people when they are not trained in how the treatment works. Therapists and counselors and stuff who have just the base level training and nothing specialized at all in trauma should not try to do trauma processing. And at the very least, they should give like a major disclaimer of, I can be here and I can listen to you, but I can't do actual trauma processing because I'm not trained in it, and doing it wrong can cause more harm. So I'm not going to try to guide you through processing your trauma, but I can listen to anything you want to share, you know? But yeah, before I just keep like rambling and ranting about this forever, I guess, that is the core of the idea. So thank you for watching the video, and I hope you really liked it. And if you did, please click the like button so that we and YouTube both know that you liked it. But also, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for other videos, etc., you can put those in our comments section or come over to Discord and put them there. Our Discord is linked in the description, along with our Patreon and our Etsy shop and our wish list and our Twitch channel. And we are doing daily live streams still on Twitch right now, trying to reach affiliate, and we're making pretty good progress on that, and it's really exciting. So if you haven't yet, please come over and give us a follow on Twitch to help us out with that. But we do put those live streams up on here on YouTube once they're done, so that you can watch them here if you prefer to do that. And special thanks, as always, to our patrons, because you guys help us so much. And like I said, the link to our Patreon, if you want to check it out, is in the description as well. So I think that is everything, other than that I will put other videos on the screen that you can check out if you missed them or if they look interesting. So yeah, subscribe, and all those things. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.